A slap silenced the table, but the real drama unfolded the day that silence was broken. So, will it be a mother's dignity or a woman's honor that prevails? You'll find out in this story. Stay with us until the end, and be part of this emotional journey. The sound of the slap echoed through the dining room of that house in the Upper West Side neighborhood of New York City. All conversation ceased instantly. Time seemed to stand still as Alexandra felt the burning sensation spreading across her left cheek, the marks of Doña Mercedes's fingers beginning to show on her skin. "You're an ungrateful woman, a slut who came to take my son away from me," shouted Mercedes Olivares de Ramirez, a 62-year-old woman with jet-black dyed hair, dressed in an elegant coral-colored outfit, specially chosen to celebrate Mother's Day. Alexandra Gomez, 34, stood motionless with a half-served plate of mole poblano in her hands. Tears began to well up in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not in front of this woman who had been humiliating her for 8 years. "Mom, please," whispered Edward, her husband, without getting up from his chair, without really defending her. The children, Mateo, 7, and Sophia, 5, watched the scene with frightened eyes from their seats. The little girl began to sob quietly. The luxurious dining room of the residence in the Upper West Side neighborhood had become a battlefield. The long mahogany table was decorated with floral arrangements of red and white carnations. The fine porcelain tableware sparkled under the light of the crystal chandelier, and the typical dishes, chiles en nogada, mole poblano, and red rice, perfumed the air. The music of José Alfredo Jiménez played in the background at such a low volume that it was barely audible. It was May 10th, Mother's Day in New York, and the entire Ramirez family had gathered for the annual celebration at the matriarch's home. Edward's brothers and their families, cousins, uncles, and aunts were all present and all witnesses to the humiliation. It had all started an hour earlier when Alexandra gave her gift, a handmade embroidery that had taken weeks to finish with the help of Mateo and Sophia. It was a labor of love with a phrase that, although subtle, hid years of pain. "Thank you for teaching me what kind of mother I don't want to be." Mercedes had unwrapped it with a fake smile, but her eyes had darkened as she read the inscription. She had put it aside without comment, but Alexandra knew that the bomb would eventually explode, and so it did. In the middle of the meal, Mercedes had begun to make comments about Sophia's strange eye color. "It's curious, isn't it?" she had said in a honeyed voice as she looked at her granddaughter. "In our family, we all have dark eyes, but the little girl came out with such peculiar eyes. Whose did she get them from, Alexandra?" The uncomfortable silence was broken only by the clinking of cutlery. "From my maternal grandfather," Alexandra replied in a controlled voice. "There are many European descendants in Veracruz, Doña Mercedes. I've explained this to you before." "Oh yes, Veracruz." Mercedes made a dismissive gesture with her hand. "That fishing village. Where are you from?" Alexandra clenched her fists under the table. She came from Corpus Christi, an important city in the state of Veracruz. It was not a backwater, as her mother-in-law always implied, but Mercedes never missed an opportunity to remind her of her humble origins, so different from the Ramirez family's pedigree in the capital. The tension escalated with each venomous comment about the food Alexandra had helped prepare. "It's too spicy. It ruins the flavor." About her dress, so simple for a special occasion. About her way of raising children. "In this family, we've always been strict. That's why we're good people." And finally, the last straw. "Actually, Edward and you should take a paternity test," Mercedes had said with feigned innocence as she poured more wine, "just to make sure the girl is a real Ramirez, with those strange eyes." That's when Alexandra, unable to contain herself any longer, replied, "The thing is, you can't stand that your grandchildren love me more than you, Doña Mercedes. And you're right, I'm teaching them not to be like you." The slap came immediately after, and now, with her cheek burning and everyone's eyes fixed on her, Alexandra made the most important decision of her life. She left the plate on the table with trembling hands, wiped her mouth with the napkin, and stood up with all the dignity she could muster. "Mateo, Sophia, we're leaving," she said firmly. "But Mom," Mateo began to protest. "Now," Alexandra insisted. The children got up obediently. Edward remained seated with a confused expression, as if he didn't know what to do. Alexandra, don't be dramatic. Mercedes intervened. It was just a slap. Women of my generation settle things this way. Edward, said Alexandra, looking at her husband, are you coming with us or staying with your mother? The question hung in the air like a sentence. Edward looked at his mother, then at his wife, then at the rest of the family who were watching expectantly. I think we should all calm down, he finally replied. Mom didn't want to. I understand, Alexandra cut in. Let's go, kids. She took Sophia by the hand while Matteo followed her in silence. No one dared to stop them as they crossed the elegant dining room toward the exit. Edward, do something! Mercedes screamed, but her son remained motionless. As she gathered her bags in the hall, Alexandra heard Mercedes say loudly, I always knew it. She's a gold digger who came to divide the family. I warned you when you brought her from that little town. With trembling hands, Alexandra called an Uber from her cell phone. As they waited at the entrance to the residence, she looked at her children's frightened faces. Are you okay, Mom? Matteo asked in a small voice. Alexandra crouched down to her children's height and hugged them tightly. We're going to be fine, my loves, she whispered, although she wasn't sure she believed it herself. When the car arrived, they got in silently. Alexandra gave the address of her apartment in the Park Slope neighborhood, not far from there, but a world away at that moment. As the vehicle drove through the streets decorated with balloons and flowers for Mother's Day, Alexandra took out her phone. With trembling fingers, she dialed a number she knew by heart. Mom, she said when they answered on the other end, I need to talk to you. Something horrible happened. And as she began to recount what had happened to her mother, who listened attentively from Coatzacoalcos, an idea began to form in her mind. This time, she would not remain silent. This time, the world would know what had happened in that house in the Upper West Side neighborhood. This time, Doña Mercedes Olivares de Ramirez would learn that Alexandra Gomez was not to be trifled with. The light of dawn filtered through the curtains of the small apartment in the Park Slope neighborhood. Alexandra had not slept all night. Her eyes, swollen from crying, stared at the ceiling as she mentally reviewed everything that had happened the day before. Next to her, Sophia slept peacefully, clutching her favorite doll. She had put her in her bed when she started crying in the middle of the night, frightened by nightmares in which Grandma Mercedes was screaming. Matteo, more reserved with his emotions, had locked himself in his room after eating just a little of the instant soup Alexandra had managed to prepare. Alexandra's phone had not stopped vibrating. 20 missed calls from Edward, 8 voicemails she had not listened to, and dozens of text messages in which he alternated between lukewarm apologies and reproaches for having made a scene and ruined her Mother's Day. Your mother slapped me in front of our children, Edward, Alexandra had replied, in the only message she sent him before silencing her phone. Now, at 6 a.m., she got up carefully so as not to wake Sophia, went to the kitchen, and made coffee. The apartment was small, but cozy, decorated with handicrafts from her native Veracruz and family photographs. She had insisted on buying it herself with the money from her father's inheritance, even though Edward had wanted them to live in a property owned by the Ramirez family. At times like this, she was glad she had made that decision. Her phone vibrated again. This time it was a message from her mother, Guadalupe. Daughter, how did you sleep? I'm very worried. Please call me when you wake up. Alexandra smiled sadly. Doña Guadalupe Torres, at 60, had raised 3 children alone in Corpus Christi after her husband died in an accident on the oil rig where he worked. She had never remarried, devoting herself entirely to her family and her small grocery store. She was the polar opposite of Mercedes Olivares, with her life of luxury in the capital and her obsession with appearances. The conversation with her mother the night before had given her strength. My daughter, no one, absolutely no one, has the right to lay a hand on you, Guadalupe had said fiercely. Not even your husband's mother. And if he doesn't defend you, then all the more reason for you to defend yourself. As she sipped her coffee, Alexandra opened her Facebook profile. She hesitated for a moment, her finger hovering over the screen. What she was about to do would change everything forever. There would be no turning back. She took a deep breath and began to write. I never thought I would have to share something like this, but today, on Mother's Day, my mother-in-law hit me in front of my children. The reason? An embroidered gift we gave her with the phrase, "Thank you for teaching me what kind of mother I don't want to be." For 8 years, I have endured her humiliations for coming from Corpus Christi, her insinuations that my daughter is not my husband's, her constant criticism of my parenting. Today, I say enough is enough. Domestic violence doesn't only come from husbands. Sometimes it comes in the form of advice from mothers-in-law who believe they have a right over our lives. And the worst thing is when our partners remain silent and allow it. Breaking the silence. Domestic violence. Mother's Day. She attached a photo of her cheek, where the reddish mark of Mercedes's fingers was still clearly visible. Her finger trembled before pressing post. Once she did, she left her phone on the table and covered her face with her hands. The sound of footsteps made her look up. Matteo was standing in the kitchen doorway, with his hair tousled and his eyes sleepy. "Good morning, my love," said Alexandra, forcing a smile. "Would you like some breakfast?" Matteo shook his head. "Daddy coming?" he asked in a small voice. Alexandra felt a lump in her throat. She didn't want to lie to her son, but she didn't have a clear answer either. "I don't know, sweetheart, but don't worry about it." "Yes, Mommy is here and everything will be fine." The boy nodded without much conviction and sat down at the table. Alexandra poured him a glass of milk and began to prepare scrambled eggs. The routine helped her stay calm. "Mom," Matteo said after a while, "Grandma Mercedes is mean, isn't she?" Alexandra stopped short. She didn't want to turn her children against their grandmother. "Despite everything, Grandma has a difficult way of showing love," she replied carefully. "But that doesn't give her the right to hurt others." "Dad didn't say anything when she hit you," Matteo continued with the painful insight of a 7-year-old. "Why didn't he defend you?" Tears threatened to return, but Alexandra held them back. She sat down in front of her son and took his small hands in hers. "Sometimes adults are afraid to confront other people, even when we know they're doing something wrong. Your dad loves your mom very much and finds it hard to see her as someone who can make mistakes." "I'll always defend you, Mom," Matteo said with conviction. Alexandra hugged him tightly, allowing herself to cry a little on her little boy's shoulder. The apartment doorbell rang, startling them both. Alexandra quickly wiped away her tears and went to the door. Through the peephole, she saw Edward looking disheveled and holding a bouquet of flowers. She took a deep breath before opening the door. "Alexandra, please," Edward began as soon as he saw her. "We need to talk." "Come in," she replied curtly. "The children are awake." Edward entered the apartment with an air of defeat. Dark circles marked his face, and his shirt was wrinkled as if he had slept in it. "Dad!" Matteo exclaimed, running toward him. Edward hugged his son and ruffled his hair. "Hi, champ. How are you?" "Fine," the boy replied, suddenly shy. "You came to stay with us." Edward looked at Alexandra for help, but she remained impassive. "Let's talk to Mom first." "Yes, why don't you go see if your sister is awake yet?" Matteo nodded and reluctantly went to his room. When they were alone, Edward awkwardly held out the bouquet of flowers. "They're your favorites, sunflowers." Alexandra looked at him without taking the bouquet. "Do you really think flowers are going to fix what happened yesterday?" Edward looked down. "Ale, I know my mom crossed the line. What she did was wrong, but she's sorry." "Sorry?" Alexandra let out a bitter laugh. "Let me guess. She didn't tell you, but she asked you to tell me she is." Edward's silence was all the confirmation she needed. "Did you see my Facebook post?" Alexandra asked. "What post?" Alexandra took her phone and showed it to him. Edward paled as he read it, and his eyes widened in horror when he saw the photo of the bruised cheek. "Alexandra, how could you? This is a family matter, not something to be posted on social media. A family matter." Alexandra raised her voice, but held back when she remembered that the children could hear. "Your mother humiliated and assaulted me in front of your whole family. No one said anything. Not you, not your brothers, not anyone. And now you're asking me to keep it a secret. My mom is a respected person in the neighborhood. She has her foundation to help orphaned children. This could destroy her reputation. What about me, Edward? What about what she did to me? What about your children watching their mother being beaten?" Edward slumped down on the sofa, running his hands through his hair in a gesture of despair. I don't know what to do, Ailey. I love you. I love the children. But she's my mother. She's always been like this, Edward. She's always put herself first. Ever since we got married. That's not fair. I've done everything to give them the best. The best materially, yes. But you've never defended me from her. You've never set limits. And yesterday she crossed a line that can't be erased. Edward was silent for a long time. Finally, he looked up. What do you want me to do? I want you to be on my side for once in your life. Completely. Without any half measures. I want you to tell your mother that what she did was wrong, that you won't tolerate it, and that if she wants to continue being part of our lives, she needs to sincerely apologize and change her attitude. Ailey, you know how she is. She'll never. Then you'll have to choose, Edward. If you can't put your family first, maybe we should rethink everything. The words hung in the air like a threat. Edward looked genuinely distressed. Alexandra's phone began to vibrate insistently on the table. Facebook notifications. Her post was being shared at an alarming rate. She picked it up and saw comments starting to come in. Girl, the same thing happened to me with my mother-in-law. I kept quiet for years. Bravo for speaking up. This is more common than we think. Dominant mothers who won't let go of their sons are a real problem in our society. Where are those men when you need them? Always silent in front of their mothers. Time to wake up, gentlemen. Alexandra looked at Edward, who was staring at the screen with a horrified expression. This is getting out of control, he muttered. No, Edward. For the first time in 8 years, I'm taking control. At that moment, Edward's phone rang. His mother's photo appeared on the screen. Edward looked at Alexandra, then at the phone, undecided. You should answer it, Alexandra said calmly. She's probably already seen the post. With a trembling hand, Edward accepted the call and walked away to the kitchen to talk. Alexandra stayed in the living room, looking out the window at the busy avenue. A new message arrived on her phone. It was from an unknown number. Hello, Alexandra. My name is Paulina Mendoza from the Voices United Against Domestic Violence Foundation. Your post is resonating with many women. We would like to invite you to share your story on our radio program. Please contact me if you are interested. Alexandra felt a mixture of surprise and validation. Her personal story was touching something much bigger than herself. From the kitchen, she heard Edward raise his voice. No, Mom, not this time. Alexandra is my wife, and what you did to her was wrong, very wrong. For the first time in a long time, Alexandra felt that something was changing. Maybe Mother's Day had ended in the worst possible way, but what came next could be the beginning of something new, something better for her children, and maybe, just maybe, for Edward too. The Radio Capital studio in the Juarez neighborhood was lit by lights. Alexandra adjusted her headphones while the producer motioned to her from the other side of the glass. Her heart was beating so hard that she was afraid it would be heard through the microphone. We're on the air in 3, 2, 1, the producer indicated. Good afternoon, listeners across New York, announced the warm voice of Paulina Mendoza. This is Paulina, speaking on Voces de New York. And today, we have a special guest, Alexandra Gomez, a woman who 3 days ago shared her experience of domestic violence on social media, specifically from her mother-in-law on Mother's Day. Alexandra, welcome to the program. Thank you for inviting me, Paulina, Alexandra replied, surprised at how steady her voice sounded despite her nerves. Your Facebook post has been shared more than 50,000 times and has sparked a national debate on a topic that is often discussed: violence perpetrated by mothers-in-law against daughters-in-law. Did you expect this reaction? Alexandra shook her head before remembering she was on the radio. Not at all. All I wanted was to vent, to break the silence I had kept for 8 years. I never imagined that so many women would identify with my story. The fact is that you touched a raw nerve in our Mexican society. The figure of the domineering mother-in-law exists in our collective imagination. We even normalize it in jokes and soap operas, but we rarely talk about the real damage caused by these family dynamics. Tell us, if it's not too painful, how did this conflictive relationship with your mother-in-law begin? Alexandra took a deep breath. 3 days had passed since the incident, and although the physical mark had disappeared from her cheek, the emotional wounds were still open. It started the day Edward introduced me as his girlfriend. I was coming from Corpus Christi. I was finishing my graphic design degree at UNAM. Doña Mercedes looked me up and down, and the first thing she said was, "A Veracruz woman? I thought you had better taste, son." She disguised it as a joke. Everyone laughed, but I knew at that moment that she didn't accept me. And your husband? How did he react? Edward just smiled uncomfortably. He said something like, "Mom, please." But he didn't go any further, and that's how it's always been. Small humiliations disguised as jokes or advice. Constant criticism of the way I dress, talk, and raise my children. And Edward downplaying it all, telling me I was exaggerating, that his mother was like that with everyone. What was the hardest thing to bear during those years? Alexandra couldn't help her voice breaking. The insinuations about my daughter. Sophia has light eyes, which is unusual in Edward's family, but comes from my side. Since she was born, Doña Mercedes began to sow doubts about his paternity. Comments like, "How curious that she doesn't look like any of the Ramirezes," or direct questions to Edward about whether he was sure she was his. The most painful thing was that he never confronted her about it. And then Mother's Day came. What happened? Exactly. Alexandra recounted the events of that day in detail. The gift with the subtle message, the tension during the meal, the direct accusation about Sophia's paternity, and finally, the slap. The studio fell silent when she finished her story. "It's shocking," Paulina finally said, and what followed demonstrates the power of breaking the silence. Your post not only generated solidarity, but has started a movement on social media with the hashtag #AbusiveMothers-in-law, where thousands of women are sharing similar experiences. That's been the most surprising thing, Alexandra admitted. I received messages from women all over New York, even from other countries, with stories much worse than mine. Women who have endured years of psychological abuse, some even physical, because that's how mothers-in-law are, or because their husbands don't defend them. How has your mother-in-law reacted to this public exposure? Alexandra shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I haven't spoken to her directly. According to Edward, she is devastated by the betrayal and the damage to her public image. She is the president of a foundation for orphaned children, and this has affected her reputation. But she has shown no real remorse for what she did to me. And has your husband taken sides? It was the question Alexandra feared. The last 3 days had been a roller coaster with Edward. It's complicated, she replied cautiously. For the first time in 8 years, he stood up to his mother on the phone. He told her that what she did was wrong and that she should apologize. But then, when my post went viral and messages of support started coming in, messages attacking his mother, I think he got scared. He asked me to delete it, saying I was destroying his family. We've spent 3 days arguing and not talking. Is he living with you and the children? No, he went to a hotel. He says he needs space to think. And you, Alexandra, what do you hope to get out of all this? What would be a positive outcome for you and your family? Alexandra took a moment to reflect. What I hope for is dignity, respect. If Mercedes wants to continue being part of our lives, she needs to acknowledge the damage she has caused and genuinely change her behavior. And Edward needs to decide what kind of man, husband, and father he wants to be. One who allows his family to be mistreated, or one who sets healthy boundaries. We are receiving many calls from listeners who want to talk to you, Paulina reported. Is it okay if we take a few? Alexandra nodded, and soon she was responding to women who shared similar stories, who thanked her for her courage, who asked her how she had found the strength to speak out. The hour-long program flew by. When it ended, Alexandra felt strangely light, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders, but also anxious about what would come next. As she left the studio, Paulina hugged her. "You've helped a lot of women today," she said. "How do you feel?" Alexandra confessed. "I didn't think my personal story would have such an impact. Sometimes we don't realize the power of our voice until we use it," Paulina replied with a smile. "By the way, I have something important to tell you. The National Foundation Against Family Violence is organizing an event next week. They want you to be one of the keynote speakers." Alexandra stopped in her tracks. "Me? But I'm not an expert on any of this." "You are an expert on your own experience, and that is invaluable. Violence in the in-law family is an invisible issue, and you have hit the nail on the head. Please think about it." Alexandra promised to consider it. As she left the building, she saw that she had several missed calls from Edward. With a sigh, she called him back as she walked to the subway station. "Ale." Edward's voice sounded strange. "Where are you?" "I just left Radio Capital. I was on a program talking about what happened." Silence on the other end of the line. "A radio program?" Edward finally asked. "Why didn't you tell me? I didn't think you cared." "You said you needed space. Of course I care. It's my family. My mother you're talking about, publicly." Alexandra stopped in the middle of the sidewalk. "Your family, your mother, and me, Edward. What about your children? Aren't we your family too?" "You know that's not what I meant," he protested. "But this is getting out of control. My mother has received threats on social media. Someone painted abuser on the wall of her house. Her foundation is considering asking her to resign, all because of a slap. All because of a slap," Alexandra repeated in disbelief. "Listen to what you're saying. You're minimizing what she did to me because she's your mother. 8 years of humiliation, Edward. 8 years of putting up with her questioning the paternity of your daughter. Do you think it's just a slap?" "I don't know what to do, Aile." Edward's voice sounded defeated. "I love you, but she's my mother, and that's the problem. She's always been your mother first. Always." Before Edward could respond, Alexandra saw someone familiar approaching on the sidewalk. Her heart skipped a beat when she recognized Mercedes Olivares, impeccably dressed in a beige suit, dark glasses covering her eyes. "Edward, I'll call you later," she said quickly. "Your mother is here." "What? Where? In front of the radio station?" "I have to hang up." Alexandra put her phone away as Mercedes approached with determined steps. Her stomach knotted with anxiety. Alexandra greeted Mercedes coldly. "We need to talk, Doña Mercedes," Alexandra replied, surprised at how firm her voice sounded. "I didn't expect to see you here. I didn't expect to have to come and find you in public, but you left me no choice. Can we go somewhere more private?" Alexandra looked around. The street was crowded with office workers leaving for lunch. "The cafe on the corner," she suggested, pointing to a small establishment. "It's fairly quiet at this hour." Mercedes nodded curtly, and they walked silently to the cafe. It was a cozy place with few occupied tables. They sat in a secluded corner. Mercedes waited for the waitress to take their order, an Americano for her, an herbal tea for Alexandra, before they spoke. "I want you to take down that post and publicly retract it," she said without preamble. "What you're doing is defamation." Alexandra stared at her. "Defamation? Are you denying that you hit me?" Mercedes shifted uncomfortably. It was a moment of excitement. "You provoked me with that impertinent gift, and now you're destroying my reputation, my years of work with the foundation. I've received threats, Alexandra. There are people watching my house, all because of your need for attention." Alexandra felt rage rising in her throat, but she held back. "My need for attention. For 8 years I've put up with your contempt, your insinuations about Sophia's paternity, your constant humiliations about coming from Coatzacoalcos, and I'm the one seeking attention." "You exaggerate everything," Mercedes snapped. "You've always been too sensitive. You've never understood how families like ours, like hers, work, where violence is disguised as love and control as concern." Mercedes slammed her palm on the table, making the cups rattle. "Enough. I have influence, Alexandra. I can make this very difficult for you. You're threatening me." Alexandra leaned forward. "Because if you are, it only confirms everything I've said about you." Something in Alexandra's steady gaze made Mercedes recoil slightly. "I just want to protect my family," she said in a lower voice. "Edward, my grandchildren. I want to protect them too, from you, if necessary." Mercedes looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. "You've really changed," she said with an almost admiring tone. "The Alexandra of a week ago would not have dared to speak to me like this." The Alexandra of a week ago still believed she had to endure his abuse to keep the peace in the family. The Alexandra of today knows she deserves respect. They looked at each other in silence, as if sizing each other up. Finally, Mercedes sighed. "What do you want, Alexandra? What do you need to stop all this?" It was the question Alexandra had been waiting for, but now that she had it in front of her, she found that her answer was more complex than she had imagined. I want a sincere apology, not just for the slap, but for 8 years of abuse. I want you to acknowledge that what you have done is wrong. I want you to seek professional help to manage your need for control. And I want you to set clear boundaries in our relationship, to respect my decisions as a mother and as the wife of your son." Mercedes looked at her in disbelief. "Are you demanding conditions?" "They're not conditions to me, Doña Mercedes. They're healthy boundaries for a family relationship." Alexandra's phone vibrated. It was a message from Edward. "Where are you? What's going on with Mom?" Mercedes saw the name on the screen. "Edward is very upset by all this," she said, changing her strategy. "He's between a rock and a hard place. It's not fair what you're doing to him. What's not fair is that your son has to choose between his wife and his mother. But you've put him in that position, not me. You've always wanted to keep him away from me," Mercedes accused. "From the beginning." "No, Doña Mercedes. I've always wanted us to have a normal mother-in-law and daughter-in-law relationship. You're the one who has never accepted me." The tension between the two was palpable. The waitress passing by the table quickened her pace to avoid them. "I spoke to my lawyers this morning," Mercedes said, returning to the attack. "I can sue you for damages. My foundation is losing sponsors." "Go ahead," Alexandra replied calmly. "It will be interesting to hear your testimony under oath, explaining why you hit the mother of your grandchildren." Mercedes pressed her lips into a thin line. For the first time, she seemed to be at a loss for words. Alexandra's phone vibrated again. This time, it was a call from Paulina Mendoza. Alexandra rejected it, but noticed she had dozens of notifications. "I have to go," she said, standing up. "Think about what I said, Doña Mercedes. I'm not trying to destroy you. I just want respect for myself and my children." "This isn't over," Mercedes warned. "You're right about that," Alexandra agreed. "It's just beginning." As she left the cafe, she checked her phone. The radio interview had been recorded and shared on social media, generating thousands of comments. Paulina had sent her an urgent message. "Alexandra, CNN en Español wants to interview you tomorrow for their segment on domestic violence. Are you available? It's an incredible opportunity." Alexandra stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, feeling her head spin. Her personal story was taking on dimensions she never could have imagined. For a moment, fear threatened to paralyze her. What was she getting herself into? Was it worth it? Then she remembered Sophia's expression when she saw her grandmother hit her. Edward's complicit silence, the thousands of women who had shared similar stories after her post. She took a deep breath and replied to Paulina, "I'll be there." As she put her phone away, she noticed she had 3 missed calls from Edward. She decided not to call him back yet. She needed time to process what had happened with Mercedes, to prepare for what was to come next. Because one thing was clear, there was no turning back. The CNN en Español cameras focused on Alexandra's serene face as host Gabriela Frias introduced the segment. The spotlights blinded her slightly, and she could feel beads of sweat forming on her forehead under the professional makeup that had been applied minutes earlier. Joining us in the studio is Alexandra Gomez, who has become the face of a movement that has been shaking New York in recent days, Gabriela announced. A woman who, after being physically assaulted by her mother-in-law during a Mother's Day family meal, decided to break her silence on social media, unleashing an avalanche of similar testimonies. "Alexandra, thank you for being with us. Thank you for giving me this space," replied Alexandra, surprised at how natural it felt to speak in front of the cameras despite her nerves. "Your Facebook post, along with the photo of the mark on your cheek, has been shared more than 100,000 times and has generated the hashtag #AbusiveMothers-in-law. Did you expect this response when you decided to share your experience?" "Not at all," Alexandra confessed. "It was a decision made in a moment of vulnerability after years of silently enduring humiliation. All I was looking for was to vent, maybe find some words of support. I never imagined it would resonate with so many people." The phenomenon of toxic mothers-in-law seems to be universal, but it is especially ingrained in Latin American culture. Why do you think this type of behavior has become so normalized? Alexandra had thought a lot about that question in recent days. "I think it has to do with how we understand motherhood in our culture. There's this idea that children, especially boys, belong to their mothers for life. When a woman marries a man, she is often seen as an intruder who has come to steal her mother's son, and many adult men continue to act like children around their mothers, without setting clear boundaries. We see it as normal, even comical. She paused. Think about how many jokes and memes there are about evil mothers-in-law and the poor daughters-in-law who have to put up with them. That has helped normalize a very real and painful problem. In your case, what role did your husband play in all this? The question Alexandra feared. Edward had seen the promotion for the interview and called her furious, accusing her of exposing the family for media attention. After a heated argument, he had threatened to file for divorce if she continued to publicly humiliate him. The lump in Alexandra's throat grew larger. "It's complicated," she replied cautiously. "I think many men like my husband are caught in the middle of a conflict of loyalties. They love their mothers, they respect them deeply, but they also love their wives. When a conflict arises between the two, they often choose the path of least resistance. They remain silent, don't take sides, and wait for things to resolve themselves. But that silence, that inaction, is in itself a way of taking sides, and generally that side is the mother's," Alexandra added, "because the fear of confronting the mother who has controlled him all his life is greater than the fear of disappointing his wife. My mother-in-law often reminds my husband, 'I gave birth to you. I was first in your life,' and that's true. But that doesn't give her the right to mistreat you," Gabriella interjected. "Exactly." Alexandra felt her eyes well up, but she managed to hold back the tears. Not her, not anyone. The interview continued for another 20 minutes. Alexandra talked about the impact on her children, about the thousands of women who had written to her, sharing similar or worse experiences of the event organized by the National Foundation Against Family Violence, where she would be participating the following week. When it was over, she felt exhausted, but strangely empowered. On the way home, her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Calls and messages from friends, family, and strangers who had seen the interview. One of the messages was from her mother, Guadalupe. "Mija, I saw you on TV. I'm so proud of you. You're helping so many women with your courage. Your dad would be very proud too. I love you." The tears she had held back during the interview finally flowed. Another notification arrived, a message from Edward. "I see you've decided your path. I'll stop by the apartment to pick up some things. You won't be there, right?" Alexandra felt a sharp pain in her chest. Despite everything, she loved Edward. They had built a life together for 8 years. He was the father of her children, her partner, the man she had dreamed of growing old with. Was she really willing to lose him over this? But the real question was she willing to continue sacrificing her dignity, her emotional well-being, for a man who was unable to defend her? She replied with trembling hands, "I'll be picking up the kids from school and then we'll go to the park. You have 2 hours." She put her phone away and rested her head against the taxi window, watching the streets of New York City go by. Her life had taken a 180-degree turn in less than a week, and the most disconcerting thing was that in the midst of the chaos, she felt that for the first time in a long time, she was being true to herself. The taxi stopped in front of Benito Juarez Elementary School in the Park Slope neighborhood. There were 15 minutes left before dismissal. Alexandra took the opportunity to check her makeup in a small mirror and dry the traces of tears. She didn't want Mateo and Sofia to see her like this. While she waited, another call came in. It was Paulina Mendoza. "Alexandra, you were brilliant in the interview. Social media is exploding with your story. Thank you, Paulina. It was easier than I thought. I have important news," Paulina continued enthusiastically. "The Foundation's event has generated so much interest that they are moving it to the National Auditorium, and we are negotiating a live broadcast on Televisión Azteca." Alexandra was speechless. The National Auditorium. But it's huge, and will be packed. Violence in the in-laws family is an issue that has been silenced for too long. Your story has opened the floodgates, Alexandra. Thousands of women want to attend, share their experiences, find solutions. "This is too big for me," Alexandra murmured, feeling short of breath. "I'm just a graphic designer from Coatzacoalcos. I'm no expert." That's precisely why your voice is so powerful. You don't speak from theory, but from lived experience. You're real, Alexandra, and that connects with people in a way that no expert could ever achieve. Alexandra saw the children starting to leave school. I have to hang up, Paulina. The children are coming out. I'll call you later. She hurried to the school gate, where she spotted Matteo coming out with his superhero backpack. His face lit up when he saw her. Mom! He ran to her, hugging her tightly. I saw you on TV. Teacher Lucy showed your interview in class and said you were very brave. Alexandra felt a mixture of pride and embarrassment. She hadn't considered that her children might see the interview or hear comments about it. Really? She tried to sound casual. What did you think? It was cool. All my friends said my mom is famous, Matteo replied with a smile. Diego said his grandmother is also mean to his mom, just like Grandma Mercedes. Before Alexandra could respond, Sophia came running up with her little pink backpack bouncing on her back. Mommy! She jumped into her arms. Juana told me you're a superhero who fights mean grandmas. Alexandra couldn't help but laugh, despite the seriousness of the situation. No, sweetie, I don't fight mean grandmas. I just talk about how people should treat each other with respect, even within the family. Grandma Mercedes isn't going to yell at us anymore, Sophia asked innocently. The question hit Alexandra like a rock. How could she explain the complexity of what was happening to a 5-year-old? Let's go to the park, shall we? She replied, evading the question. Can we buy ice cream on the way? The children celebrated the idea and set off on the walk to New York Park, a few blocks away. As the children ran ahead, Alexandra checked her phone. Another message from Edward. I've already picked up my things. Don't worry, I didn't take much. My mother wants to talk to you. She says we can resolve this privately without lawyers. She says she's willing to apologize if you tone down the media coverage. Please think about it, for the children's sake. Alexandra clenched her phone tightly. The manipulation continued, only now it was disguised as conciliation. They really believed that everything would be fixed with a forced apology. She put her phone away without responding. She was no longer willing to give in to the pressure. The children needed her to be strong, whole, not subjected to a toxic family dynamic. In the park, while Matteo and Sophia played on the swings, Alexandra sat on a bench watching them. Her phone rang again. This time it was an unknown number. She hesitated, but finally answered. Alexandra Gomez, a female voice asked. Yes, she's speaking. Good afternoon, Ms. Gomez. I am Claudia Montero from the law firm Montero and Associates. I represent Ms. Mercedes Olivares de Ramirez. Alexandra felt her blood run cold. What do you want? She asked cautiously. My client wishes to resolve this incident amicably. She is willing to issue a formal and private apology for what happened on May 10th, on the condition that you remove your Facebook post, refrain from giving further interviews on the subject, and sign a confidentiality agreement. Otherwise, if no agreement is reached, my client will be forced to take legal action for defamation and moral damages. The consequences of your statements on Ms. Olivares' reputation and psychological well-being are considerable. Alexandra took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. Tell your client that I have nothing to negotiate. What I said is the truth, and I have witnesses who can corroborate it. If she wants to take this to court, go ahead. I wouldn't be the first woman to fight against power and money to defend her dignity. It would be unfortunate to reach that point, Ms. Gomez. Think of your children, the public exposure of a trial, the emotional strain. My children are precisely what I am thinking about, Alexandra replied firmly. I want them to grow up seeing their mother stand up for herself, not submitting to abuse out of fear. There was a silence on the other end of the line. I will give my client your answer, the lawyer finally said, but I suggest you reconsider your position. Mrs. Olivares is a woman with many resources and influences, and I am a woman who is no longer afraid, Alexandra replied, before hanging up. Her hands were shaking, but she felt strangely calm. It was the calm that comes after making an irrevocable decision to cross a bridge and burn it behind you. Mom, look how high I'm going, Matteo shouted from the swing. Alexandra smiled and gave him a thumbs up, feigning a calmness she did not feel. At that moment, she spotted a familiar figure approaching along the main path of the park. Edward looked tired, with several days' stubble and pronounced dark circles under his eyes. He stopped a few meters away, as if he didn't dare to come any closer. "Can we talk?" he asked. Alexandra nodded. "The children are playing. I don't want them to see us arguing." Edward sat down on the bench, leaving a considerable space between them. "My mother is going to sue you," he said without preamble. "Her lawyer just called me." "I know. She called me too. This is crazy, Ailey. We don't know how it's going to end. My mother is willing to apologize. We can't just accept it and go back to normal." Alexandra looked at him in disbelief. "Back to normal? You mean I should continue to put up with humiliation and abuse while you look the other way? That abnormality?" Edward looked down. "You know that's not true. My mother promised to change, to behave better toward you. She's promised that before, Edward. After every argument, every scene, every hurtful comment. And she's never changed. This time is different. She's really scared about what's happening. Her foundation asked her to step down, temporarily. Some of her friends have turned their backs on her. I've never seen her like this. And that should make me feel bad," Alexandra asked. "I'm supposed to feel compassion for the woman who has made my life miserable for 8 years and is now facing the consequences of her actions. She's my mother, Ale." Edward's voice broke. "Despite everything, she's my mother, and I'm your wife," Alexandra replied firmly. "Or at least I was, until you threatened to divorce me for defending my dignity." Edward ran his hands through his hair in a gesture of despair. "I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose my children, but I also can't turn my back on my mother when she needs me most. I'm not asking you to choose between her and me, Edward. I'm asking you to choose between what's right and what's comfortable, between being a man who defends his family and one who allows them to be mistreated for fear of confronting his mother." Edward looked at her with teary eyes. "And what am I supposed to do? Yell at my mother? Walk away from her forever? No. Just set clear boundaries. Tell her you love her, but that you won't tolerate her treating me badly or interfering in our family. That if she wants to be part of our lives, she must respect us all, including me." Alexandra's phone rang again. It was Paulina. "I have to take this," she said, getting up from the bench. "Matteo, Sophia, keep playing. Mom has to talk on the phone for a moment." She walked a few steps away before answering. "Paulina, what's going on, Alexandra?" Paulina's voice sounded excited. "You won't believe who just called me. Samantha Leon, the president of the National Foundation Against Domestic Violence, saw your interview on CNN and wants to offer you a position as the foundation's official spokesperson. It's a paid job, Alexandra. You could turn your experience into a platform to help other women." Alexandra was speechless. It was an opportunity she never could have imagined. For years, she had worked as a freelance designer, taking on projects she could do from home so she could take care of the children. A stable job with purpose that valued her voice. "It's incredible, Paulina, but I don't know if I'm qualified. I don't have any experience in activism, nor do I have the most important experience, which is lived experience," Paulina interrupted. "Besides, your training in graphic design is perfect for the Foundation's communications department. Think about it, Alexandra. It's an opportunity to transform your pain into something positive. I need time to consider it," Alexandra replied, looking toward the bench where Edward was still sitting, watching the children. "I'm in the middle of a lot of things right now. Of course, take your time, but not too long. Samantha needs an answer by Monday." Alexandra hung up and slowly walked back to the bench. Edward looked at her curiously. "Bad news?" he asked. "No, quite the opposite. I've been offered a job as spokesperson for the National Foundation Against Domestic Violence." Edward looked at her in surprise. "Are you going to accept it?" "I don't know. It's a great opportunity, but it would mean continuing with all this," Edward added. "Continuing to speak publicly, continuing to expose our story. It's not our story, Edward. It's my story. My experience as a woman who has suffered abuse from her mother-in-law with the silent complicity of her husband." The words floated between them like knives. Edward stood up. "I think it's pretty clear where this is going," he said bitterly. "You've made your decision." "No, Edward. You've made yours. Every day for 8 years, when you chose to look the other way, they stared at each other, like two strangers who once loved each other and now didn't recognize each other." "Dad!" Sophia shouted, running toward them. "Come push me on the swing!" Edward forced a smile and picked up the little girl. "Of course, Princess. Let's go. Alexandra watched them walk away toward the swings. Her phone vibrated with a new message. It was from an unknown number. This is Lucero Hernandez from El Universal newspaper. We are preparing a special report on domestic violence in New York. Your case has sparked a national debate. Could we interview you for our Sunday edition? Before she could reply, another message arrived, this time from her mother, Mia. I'm packing my suitcase. I'm leaving for New York tomorrow. I'm not going to leave you alone right now. I love you. Alexandra smiled through the tears that were beginning to form in her eyes. She felt as if she were in the eye of a hurricane, with everything spinning at breakneck speed around her. But for the first time in a long time, she felt that she was not alone. She looked over at the swings where Edward was pushing Sophia, while Matteo waited his turn, the perfect image of a happy family, an image that no longer corresponded to her reality. Was she willing to give up that image to defend her dignity? To trade the security of the familiar for the uncertainty of a new path? The answer came clearly to her mind. Yes, for herself, for her children, for all the women who, like her, had endured in silence. Because sometimes the true act of love for a family is not to keep it together at any cost, but to have the courage to break the toxic cycles that make it sick. With that certainty in her heart, Alexandra took a deep breath and began to walk toward her children, toward her future. A future that, for the first time in a long time, truly belonged to her. The National Auditorium in New York City had never seen anything like it. More than 10,000 women of all ages and social backgrounds filled the seats, many holding signs with phrases such as, "No more silence," and "No more abusive mothers-in-law or complicit husbands." Some banners read, "We are Alexandra," a hashtag that had become a national trend. Backstage, Alexandra tried to control her nerves. A week had passed since the CNN interview. 7 dizzying days in which her personal life had become intertwined with a social movement that was growing throughout New York. 5 minutes, Alexandra, a production assistant informed her. Alexandra nodded, adjusting the turquoise blue dress that Paulina had helped her choose. "No black," her friend had insisted. "You're not a victim at a funeral, but a powerful woman on the most important stage of your life." Her phone vibrated. It was a message from Guadalupe, her mother, who had arrived from Coatzacoalcos 3 days earlier and was now looking after Matteo and Sofia in the apartment. "Mija, the kids and I will be watching you on TV. We are very proud of you. Everything is fine here. Don't worry." She smiled gratefully. Her mother's presence had been a balm amid the chaos. Guadalupe had arrived like a whirlwind of energy and affection, cooking the children's favorite dishes, helping them with their homework, and providing Alexandra with the emotional support she so desperately needed. Edward had picked up the children over the weekend, taking them to his brother Raul's house in Coyoacan. It had been a tense farewell. "I just want you to know that I didn't ask for any of this," he had said, as he waited at the door. Alexandra simply replied, "I didn't ask for your mother to hit me, or for you not to defend me either." Another message arrived on her phone. This time it was from Paulina. "The place is packed. There's international media here. Women have even come from other states. Your story has touched something deep, Alexandra. Take a deep breath and remember, every word you say today will be a beacon for someone who suffers in silence." The pressure was overwhelming. Who was she to become the voice of thousands of women? A simple graphic designer from Coatzacoalcos who had endured years of abuse from her mother-in-law, who had kept quiet, who had prioritized family peace over her own dignity. With what authority could she now stand on that stage? 2 minutes, announced the assistant. Alexandra closed her eyes and took a deep breath. An image came to her mind. Sophia, watching with frightened eyes as Mercedes slapped her. Her little girl, learning at that moment that it's okay to be mistreated, that women must endure abuse in silence, that men can look the other way. No, she would not allow that to be the lesson her daughter learned, nor that of her son. She opened her eyes with new determination. She wasn't there just for herself, but for Matteo and Sofia, for all the Sofias in the world who needed to see women standing up for themselves, setting boundaries, refusing to perpetuate cycles of abuse. "It's time," said the assistant. Alexandra walked toward the stage, momentarily blinded by the spotlights. The roar of applause enveloped her like a wave. In front of her, thousands of faces looked at her expectantly. In the front row, she spotted Paulina, who gave her 2 thumbs up in support. She approached the microphone with faltering steps. Silence fell over the auditorium. "Good evening." Her voice sounded firmer than she expected. "My name is Alexandra Gomez. 2 weeks ago, I was just another woman, tolerating abuse to keep the peace in my family. Today, I am here in front of you, thanks to a slap." She paused, surprised by the spontaneous applause that arose. "A slap that my mother-in-law gave me on Mother's Day, in front of her whole family, in front of my children. A slap that was the culmination of 8 years of humiliation, of insinuations about the paternity of my daughter, of contempt for my Veracruz origins." The audience listened in silence, but the real violence was not that slap. The real violence was the silence of my husband, my brothers-in-law, everyone present who looked the other way. The real violence was my own silence for 8 years, allowing them to treat me this way so as not to cause trouble. The words now flowed like a long, contained river. When I decided to share my story on social media, I thought I would receive some words of support from close friends. I never imagined that my personal experience would resonate with so many women. I never thought that my private pain would reflect such a deep social problem. She paused to take a sip of water. These days I have received thousands of messages from women who are in similar or worse situations. Women whose mothers-in-law control every aspect of their lives, who constantly humiliate them, who interfere in the upbringing of their children, and most painfully, women whose husbands, like mine, choose the path of silence, complicity, and denial. As she spoke, she noticed movement at the back of the auditorium. Someone was coming in late. She squinted against the spotlight and recognized a familiar figure, Edward. For a moment she lost her train of thought. What was he doing there? They hadn't spoken in days, except for brief messages related to the children. He was dressed in a suit, as if he had come straight from the office. His face in the distance was inscrutable. Alexandra took a deep breath and continued. "Many people have asked me, why now? Why didn't you speak up before? The answer is simple and painful: fear. Fear of destroying my family. Fear that my children would lose their relationship with their grandparents. Fear that my husband would have to choose between his mother and me, knowing deep down that he probably wouldn't choose me." She noticed Edward moving through the crowd, slowly approaching the stage. "But there is a fear greater than all of those. The fear that my children will grow up believing that abuse is normal, that silence is the answer, that women must endure anything for the sake of the family." She saw Edward stop in a side aisle near the stage, watching her intently. "My daughter is 5 years old. The day her grandmother hit me, she learned something. Depending on how I responded, that learning could be either women must endure abuse in silence, or women deserve respect and have the right to defend themselves. I chose to teach her the latter. Although the price was high, the audience burst into applause. Violence in the in-law family is real," she continued when the noise subsided. "It is insidious, normalized, justified with phrases such as, 'That's how mothers-in-law are,' or 'It's their way of showing love.' They make us believe that we must tolerate it out of loyalty to our partners, for the well-being of our children, for peace, to maintain family harmony." Alexandra leaned toward the microphone, her voice firmer than ever. "But there is no harmony in a family where someone is systematically mistreated. There is no well-being for our children when we teach them that abuse is acceptable. There is no loyalty in asking someone to tolerate mistreatment." The audience stood up and applauded fervently. Alexandra saw Edward out of the corner of her eye, standing motionless with his arms crossed. "Today, I want to tell all women who are suffering in silence that you are not alone. Your pain matters. Your boundaries deserve respect. And if no one else defends you, defend yourselves. Because in doing so, you are not only protecting yourselves, but also teaching your sons and daughters an invaluable lesson about dignity and respect." The ovation was deafening. Women with tears in their eyes applauded, shouted, and raised their fists in the air. Some held little girls on their shoulders. showing them Alexandra as if she were a symbol. When the applause finally subsided, Samantha Leon, president of the National Foundation Against Family Violence, joined Alexandra on stage. "Thank you, Alexandra, for your courage and honesty," she said, taking the microphone. "It is an honor to announce that Alexandra Gomez is officially joining our foundation as Director of Communications and National Spokesperson. Her personal experience and training in graphic design are exactly what we need to bring our message to more women throughout New York." New applause filled the auditorium. Alexandra smiled, although her gaze continued to search for Edward. She saw him turn around and head for the exit. A pang of pain shot through her chest. Despite everything, part of her had hoped for what? That he would come to support her, to reconcile, to ask her forgiveness for years of complicit silence. The rest of the event passed like a blurry dream. A panel of psychologists and lawyers discussed the dimensions of the problem. Other women shared their testimonies. Samantha presented a national action plan to address violence in the political family, including helplines, support groups, and awareness campaigns. When it finally ended, almost 3 hours later, Alexandra was exhausted, but strangely at peace. Hundreds of women came up to hug her, thank her, and briefly share their own stories. She signed copies of the book Breaking the Silence, which the foundation had hastily published, including her testimony along with that of other women. As she left through the back door of the auditorium, accompanied by Paulina, she was surprised to see a familiar figure waiting by a car. "Edward, I think he wants to talk to you," Paulina whispered. "Will you be okay? I can stay if you prefer." "I'll be fine," Alexandra replied. "Thanks for everything, Paulina." She approached Edward cautiously. It had been over a week since they had really spoken face to face. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said by way of greeting. Edward looked uncomfortable, shoving his hands into his pants pockets. "I didn't expect to come," he admitted, "but I felt I had to listen to you. Really listen to you for the first time." Alexandra waited, not knowing what to say. "Your speech continued, Edward. It made me see many things I didn't want to acknowledge." "Like what?" "Like I've been a coward," he replied, looking her straight in the eye. "That I've allowed my mother to mistreat you for years, because it was easier to pretend nothing was happening than to confront her." Alexandra felt a lump forming in her throat. "What do you want, Edward? Why are you here?" He took a deep breath. "I went to see my mother yesterday," he said. "I told her that her behavior toward you has been unacceptable, that if she wants to continue to be part of our lives, she needs to sincerely apologize and change." Alexandra looked at him in surprise. And how did she react? How did you expect her to react? First denial, then anger. Then she tried to manipulate me with tears and reminding me of everything she's done for me. He paused. But for the first time, I didn't give in. I told her that I love you, that I love our children, and that I won't allow her to continue hurting you. Alexandra couldn't believe what she was hearing. Edward had really confronted Mercedes after all these years. "What made you change your mind?" she asked cautiously. "Several things," Edward replied. "Seeing the children constantly asking about you, why we're not together. Hearing Mateo say he wants to be brave like his mom, but above all, realizing that I'm about to lose the woman I love because I don't have the courage to do the right thing." Alexandra crossed her arms, protecting her heart. "It's been 8 years, Edward. 8 years of allowing your mother to humiliate me. It's not something that can be fixed with a conversation." "I know," Edward nodded. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I don't expect you to trust me again like you used to. I'm just asking for a chance to prove to you that I can change, that I can be the man you and the children deserve." Alexandra looked up at the night sky over New York City, trying to gather her thoughts. "I've accepted the job at the foundation," she said. "Finally, I'm going to be the communications director. It's a full-time job. I know, I heard it at the event. I think it's wonderful. Come on, you've always had so much to offer the world, beyond being a wife and mother." Alexandra looked at him in surprise. The Edward of a few weeks ago would have protested, arguing that the children needed her at home, that this job would expose her too much publicly, that it was better to keep a low profile. "Are you serious?" "Completely," Edward affirmed. "I'm proud of you, Ale, of your courage, of how you've transformed a painful experience into something that is helping so many women. Something stirred in Alexandra's heart, a small spark of hope, fragile but real. "I need time," Edward said honestly. "Time to heal, to adapt to my new job, to rebuild my confidence. I can't just go home as if nothing had happened." Edward nodded. "I understand. We'll take the time you need. In the meantime, I'll keep working on myself, on being a better man, a better father, and if you give me the chance, a better husband." Alexandra felt tears welling up in her eyes. "And your mother? I made it clear to her that you and the children are my priority now, that if she wants a relationship with me, she must respect my terms." He paused. "It wasn't easy, Ele, and I'm not sure she'll really change, but at least now she knows I won't stay silent anymore." A taxi stopped near them. Paulina had called one for Alexandra. "I have to go," Alexandra said. "Mom and the kids are waiting for me." Edward nodded. "Can I call you tomorrow? Maybe we could have lunch together, just you and me, to continue talking." Alexandra considered it. Despite all the pain, despite the betrayal, part of her still loved this man, the father of her children, the partner with whom she had built a life. "Okay," she finally conceded. "Lunch tomorrow." Edward smiled that smile that had melted her heart years ago in the university cafeteria. "Thank you, Ale, for this opportunity. I promise I won't waste it." Alexandra got into the taxi with a strange mixture of emotions stirring in her chest. She didn't know if she could rebuild her marriage, if the wound was too deep to heal, but for the first time in weeks, she felt that maybe, just maybe, all was not lost. The taxi drove through the brightly lit streets of New York City. Alexandra looked out the window, reflecting on how her life had changed so drastically in such a short time, from being a woman who endured abuse in silence to becoming the voice of thousands, from feeling trapped in a marriage where she was not respected to having the freedom to set her own terms. All because of a slap on Mother's Day, all because she had finally found the courage to say, "Enough is enough." Her phone vibrated with a message. It was from Guadalupe. "You were amazing, mija. The kids saw you on TV and couldn't stop shouting. That's my mom. We're so proud of you. Come home soon. We'll be waiting for you with chipilín tamales, your favorite." Alexandra smiled through her tears. Whatever path lay ahead of her, she was no longer alone. She had her children, her mother, new friends like Paulina and Samantha, thousands of women who supported her, and maybe, just maybe, she would also have Edward. Not the complacent, cowardly Edward he had been, but the man who was finally finding the courage to do the right thing. The taxi stopped in front of her building in the Park Slope neighborhood. She turned off the engine and got out, feeling lighter than she had in years, as if she had left behind an invisible weight she had been carrying for too long. Before entering the building, she looked up at the starry sky and took a deep breath. The life that awaited her would not be easy. There would be challenges, setbacks, moments of doubt, but for the first time, she felt that she truly belonged, that the decisions were hers, that her voice mattered, and that certainty, that newfound freedom, was worth all the pain she had had to go through to find it. The restaurant in Las Brasas, in the Upper West Side neighborhood, was a quiet place at midday, with its earth-toned decor and hanging plants that created an intimate atmosphere. Alexandra arrived 5 minutes before the agreed time, choosing a table in the most secluded corner. Her heart was pounding as she waited for Edward for their first meeting alone since the separation. A waitress approached with the menu, but Alexandra asked for just a glass of water for the moment. She needed to calm her nerves before she could think about eating. She checked her phone. 3 messages from Paulina asking how she was. One from Samantha, reminding her that tomorrow they would have their first official meeting at the foundation, and several emails from women who had seen her speech and wanted to share their stories. Alexandra's life was now moving at a dizzying pace. The event at the National Auditorium had been broadcast live on Televisión Azteca, and excerpts from her speech were circulating on all social media. A national newspaper had named her the voice New York needed, and that morning, she had received an invitation to speak at an international conference on gender violence in Bogotá. All this in just 3 weeks since that slap on Mother's Day. Alexandra looked up to find Edward standing next to the table. He was dressed casually in jeans and a blue shirt she had given him for his last birthday. He looked different, thinner, with pronounced dark circles under his eyes, but also with an intensity in his gaze that she didn't remember seeing before. "Hello, Edward," she replied, pointing to the chair in front of her. "Please sit down." Edward sat down, visibly nervous. His fingers drummed on the table. "You look well," he said. "Different, but well." "Thank you," Alexandra replied. "You look tired." Edward ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she knew well after 8 years of marriage. He always did it when he was anxious or worried. "I haven't slept much these past few weeks," he admitted. "There's a lot on my mind." The waitress returned. They ordered a salad for Alexandra, chiles rellenos for Edward. When they were alone again, an uncomfortable silence settled between them. "Matteo called me last night," Edward finally said. "He told me that his teacher had them write about their heroes, and he wrote about you." Alexandra felt a lump in her throat. She didn't know that. He wrote that his mom is brave because she defends women who are treated badly. Edward continued with a sad smile. "He said he wants to be like you when he grows up." Alexandra couldn't help but get teary-eyed. "How are the kids? Do they miss you?" Edward replied bluntly. "But they're fine. Your mother has been wonderful to them. She tells them stories about when you were little in Coatzacoalcos. Sophia now says she wants to see the sea." Alexandra smiled, imagining her mother recounting anecdotes from her childhood. Guadalupe had decided to stay in New York City indefinitely, at least until Alexandra resolved her situation, as she put it. "And you?" Alexandra asked, looking him straight in the eye. "How are you, really?" Edward took a deep breath. "To be completely honest, I'm going through the most difficult time of my life, but also the most revealing." The waitress brought their drinks. Mineral water for Alexandra, a beer for Edward. "I've been seeing a therapist," he continued when the waitress walked away. "Twice a week. He's helping me understand a lot of things about my relationship with my mother, about patterns I've repeated, about why I've had such a hard time setting boundaries." Alexandra looked at him in surprise. Edward had always been skeptical about therapy, considering it a thing for weak people, an idea he had inherited from his father. "That's unexpected." "I know." Edward let out a short laugh. "If someone had told me this a month ago, I wouldn't have believed it. But after seeing you at the National Auditorium, hearing you speak so clearly about what you've been through, something broke inside me. Ele, I realized I needed professional help to understand how I could have let things get this far." Alexandra nodded, processing his words. "And have you come to any conclusions?" Edward took a sip of his beer before answering. "Many, actually. The main one is that I grew up in a family dynamic where my mother's control was disguised as love, where questioning her authority was seen as betrayal, where boundaries didn't exist." He paused. "And I repeated that pattern with you, Ele. I expected you to tolerate my mother as I always did without complaining, without defending myself." The food arrived, but neither of them seemed to have much of an appetite. "Have you talked to her since that conversation?" Alexandra asked, stirring her salad without tasting it. Edward nodded several times. "Actually, at first, she tried to manipulate me by crying, reminding me of everything she's done for me, saying I was destroying the family for a woman." He grimaced. "As if you were just any woman and not my wife, the mother of my children, the most important person in my life." Alexandra felt a twinge in her heart as she listened to him speak like that. In 8 years, Edward had never been so explicit about his feelings toward her. "And now he's moved on to a new strategy," Edward replied. "He's trying to act like nothing happened. He invites me to lunch. He asks about the children. He talks about trivial things, but when I try to bring up what happened with you, he changes the subject or says it's not the right time." "Classic," Alexandra murmured. "Avoidance. As if not talking about something makes it cease to exist." "Exactly." Edward seemed impressed by her insight. "My therapist says it's a common defense mechanism, but I'm not allowing it anymore. I've told him clearly that if he wants to have a relationship with me and the children, we first have to resolve what happened. And that includes a sincere apology to you." Alexandra took a sip of water, feeling a mixture of emotions. On the one hand, she was impressed by the change in Edward. On the other, she couldn't help but wonder if this change would be lasting or just a temporary reaction to the crisis. "I'm proud of you," she finally said. I really know how hard it is to confront your mother. Edward reached across the table in an instinctive gesture to take her hand, but stopped halfway. Thank you. That means a lot coming from you, he said, withdrawing his hand. And you? I see you're busy with the foundation, with interviews. It's overwhelming, Alexandra confessed. Sometimes I wonder how I got here, from being a freelance designer working from home to becoming the face of a national movement. It's surreal, but you're doing amazing, Edward said sincerely. I always knew you had that fire inside you, that strength. It was just dormant. Alexandra looked at him curiously, dulled. Yes, Edward shifted uncomfortably. My therapist made me see that part of my initial attraction to you was precisely that spark, that passion you had for life. You were so different from the women in my social circle with their superficial concerns and obsession with appearances. You had dreams, strong opinions. You were authentic. And what happened to that spark? Alexandra asked, even though she feared knowing the answer. We gradually extinguished it, Edward replied sadly. Me, my mother, my family's rules. Little by little, we turned you into someone you weren't, someone who kept quiet so as not to cause problems, who dressed a certain way to be accepted, who gave up her professional dreams for the sake of the family. The words hurt, but Alexandra recognized their truth. It wasn't just your fault or your family's, she said. I allowed it. I chose silence, conformity, because it was easier than fighting. Until it wasn't, Edward added. Until my mother's slap was the last straw. Alexandra nodded. And now Edward made a gesture, sweeping his arm through the air as if to signal everything that had happened. The Alexandra I knew in college has returned. Stronger, more confident, more authentic than ever. They looked at each other in silence, recognizing each other, and at the same time discovering each other as new people. You know, Edward continued, part of me is terrified. I'm afraid that this new version of you no longer has a place for me in your life. The vulnerability in his voice touched something deep within Alexandra. It's not a question of whether there's a place for you or not, she replied softly. It's a question of what place you want to occupy, and whether you're willing to accept me as I am now, not as the docile, silent version that was comfortable for you. Edward nodded, his gaze fixed on his almost untouched plate. I want to be by your side, as your partner or your support, not as someone who limits you or silences you. He looked up. If you give me that chance, I promise I'll do everything I can to be the man you deserve. Alexandra felt her heart skip a beat. Despite all the pain, despite the betrayal, she still loved this man, but she also knew that love wasn't enough. They needed to rebuild trust, establish new patterns, learn to communicate authentically. I need time, Edward, she said honestly. Everything has changed so quickly. I'm just getting used to my new job, my new life. I can't just go back to the way we were before, because that Alexandra no longer exists. I understand, he replied. I'm not asking you to come back immediately. I'm just asking you to let me show you that I can change, that I can be the man you and the children deserve. Alexandra's phone vibrated on the table. It was a message from Samantha. Emergency at the foundation. Can you come as soon as possible? It's important. I have to go, she said, showing Edward the message. I'm sorry. Don't worry. I understand, he replied, signaling to the waitress to ask for the check. I can take you. Thanks, but I'll call an Uber, Alexandra replied. It's better that way. Edward nodded, accepting her decision without protest. Another notable change. Before he would have insisted, he would have been hurt by her rejection. While they waited, Edward told her more about the children, about how Sophia had won a drawing contest at kindergarten and how Mateo was obsessed with learning to play the guitar after watching a documentary about Carlos Santana. When the Uber arrived, they said goodbye awkwardly, not knowing whether to kiss each other on the cheek, hug, or simply shake hands. Finally, Edward leaned over and kissed her gently on the forehead. Thanks for this time, Arle. It meant a lot to me. Me too, she replied sincerely. Talk to you soon. On the way to the foundation, Alexandra reflected on the encounter. Edward seemed genuinely changed, more aware, more mature, but she also knew that real change took time, that old dynamics could resurface under pressure. She couldn't just trust his words. She needed to see consistent actions over time. The Uber stopped in front of a modern building in the Ansurs neighborhood, where the National Foundation Against Family Violence had its offices. Alexandra paid and hurried out. At the reception desk, the secretary recognized her immediately. "Ms. Gomez, they are waiting for you in the boardroom. It's urgent." Alexandra headed for the elevator, wondering what emergency could have arisen. A problem with funding? A media crisis? In the 3 weeks since she had joined the foundation, she had already learned that working for a non-profit was never boring. Upon entering the boardroom, she was surprised to find not only Samantha, but also Paulina, and a man in a suit she didn't recognize. "Alexandra, thank you for coming so quickly," said Samantha, standing up to greet her. "We have a situation that requires your immediate attention." "What's going on?" asked Alexandra, taking a seat. Samantha pointed to the man in the suit. "This is Ramon Vega, legal advisor to the Ramon Foundation. This is Alexandra Gomez, our new communications director." The lawyer nodded in greeting. "Ms. Gomez, I'm sorry to meet you under these circumstances. An hour ago, we received a notarized letter from the law firm Montero and Associates on behalf of Mrs. Mercedes Olivares de Ramirez." Alexandra felt her blood run cold. It was the lawyer who had called her weeks ago. "What does the letter say?" she asked, although she already sensed the answer. "Ms. Olivares has filed a lawsuit for defamation and moral damages against you and the foundation," explained the lawyer. "She alleges that your public statements have destroyed her reputation, causing her to lose her position at the orphan foundation she presided over, as well as serious psychological and social damage." Alexandra was speechless. Despite the previous threat, part of her had hoped that Mercedes would not go that far. "She is demanding financial compensation of 2 million pesos and a public retraction," the lawyer continued. "She is also requesting a court order for you to cease all media activity related to her." "That's absurd," Paulina interjected. "Everything Alexandra has said is true. There are witnesses to the incident. The truth is not always enough in these cases," replied the lawyer in a professional tone. "Mrs. Olivares is a respected figure in certain social circles in the capital. She has contacts, influence, and her lawyer, Claudia Montero, is known for being relentless. What options do we have?" asked Samantha. "Can we answer the lawsuit and take the case to trial?" explained Ramon. "We have solid arguments. Ms. Gomez has only recounted true events. Her intention has not been to defame, but to raise awareness about a social problem and the public interest, in this case, outweighs the possible damage to an individual's reputation." "But," Alexandra anticipated, recognizing the lawyer's tone, "but trials are unpredictable, costly, and exhausting," Ramon added. "And Ms. Olivares seems willing to take this to the bitter end." "I'm not going to retract my statements," Alexandra said firmly. "I'm not going to say that what happened didn't happen. I'm not going to be silenced." That's exactly what she wants, for me to shut up again, to submit again. Samantha put a hand on her shoulder. "And no one is asking you to do that, Alexandra. The foundation is completely on your side. In fact, this lawsuit only confirms the importance of the work we are doing." "Is there anything else?" Paulina interjected. "Not only is she suing you and the foundation, she has also filed a complaint with the DIF for alleged parental alienation." "What?" Alexandra felt the air rush out of her lungs. "Is she implying that I'm turning my children against her?" "Basically, yes," Paulina confirmed. "She alleges that you are using the children as tools in a personal vendetta against her, exposing them to the media and filling them with hatred toward their grandmother." Alexandra felt rage rising in her throat. This was a new level of manipulation. "My children have barely appeared in the media. I have deliberately protected their privacy and have never, ever spoken ill of their grandmother to them, despite everything." "We know that," Samantha assured her, "and we are convinced that any investigation by the DIF will reach the same conclusion. But you must be prepared for this new battlefront." The lawyer shuffled through his papers. "There is one additional detail that could complicate matters," he said cautiously. "Mrs. Olivares has requested testimony from your husband, Edward Ramirez. as a witness in her favor. Alexandra felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. Edward, after your conversation today, after your promises of support, are you going to testify in favor of your mother? That can't be, Edward murmured. I wouldn't do that. Are you sure? The lawyer asked. Because his testimony, she could be crucial. As her husband and a direct witness to the incident, his version would carry a lot of weight. Alexandra remembered the conversation from just an hour ago, the way Edward had talked about her therapy, her revelations, his desire to be by her side. It had all been manipulation. Her phone vibrated. A message from Edward. I just got a call from my mother's lawyer. I've been summoned as a witness in a lawsuit against you. I don't know what's going on, but I swear I had no idea about this. We can talk. I'm with the kids at my brother's house. Alexandra showed the message to the others. It seems he didn't know anything, Paulina commented. Or so he says, Ramon replied with professional skepticism. In my experience, family conflicts are the most complex. Loyalties can change quickly. No, Edward said Alexandra with more conviction than she felt. No, after everything that's happened. Samantha looked at her watch. We have to give an official response to this lawsuit, and we need to decide how to handle this in the media. As communications director, Alexandra, your input is crucial. Wouldn't that be a conflict of interest? Alexandra asked. We're talking about a lawsuit against me personally. On the contrary, Samantha replied, your personal experience is exactly what we need to address this issue with authenticity. You are the face of this movement, Alexandra, and what Mrs. Olivares is doing is nothing more than an attempt to silence you, to silence us. Alexandra considered it. Samantha was right. This lawsuit was not just a personal attack. It was an attack on all the women who had dared to break their silence, inspired by her story. We're going to stand up to her, she finally said, without fear, without backing down. And we're going to turn this into an opportunity to talk about how the judicial system is often used to silence victims. Samantha smiled approvingly. That's the Alexandra we know, said Ramon. Prepare our legal response. Paulina, we need a media strategy. And Alexandra, yes, talk to Edward. We need to know where he really stands. Alexandra nodded, although the idea of confronting Edward after this filled her with anxiety. She really didn't know anything about her mother's plans. Or had she been part of the strategy all along, keeping her distracted while Mercedes prepared her legal attack? When she left the meeting, she immediately called her mother. Mom, are the kids with you? No, my dear, Guadalupe replied. Edward picked them up a few hours ago. He said that they were going to her brother Raul's house for a family meal. Is something wrong? Alexandra felt a pang of concern. A family meal. Mercedes would be there. I have to go, Mom. I'll call you later. She hung up and dialed Edward's number. He answered on the third ring. Ale, thanks for calling. This is crazy. I swear I didn't know anything about where the kids are. Alexandra interrupted. With me at Raul's house. We're at the pool. Why is your mother there? There was a moment of silence. No, Edward replied. I haven't seen her since our last conversation. Ale, please believe me. I had no idea she was going to sue you. I found out half an hour ago when her lawyer called me. Alexandra wanted to believe him. She really wanted to. We need to talk, she said. In person, now of course. Edward replied immediately. Where? I'm on my way to Raul's house. I want to see the kids. We'll be waiting for you. During the Uber ride to Coyoacán, where Raul, Edward's older brother, lived, Alexandra tried to gather her thoughts. The last 3 weeks had been an emotional roller coaster, and now this lawsuit threatened to derail everything she had built. Not just her relationship with Edward, but also her new job, her platform for helping other women. Was that what Mercedes was after? To destroy not only the intruder who had stolen her son, but also the movement that intruder had created. The Uber stopped in front of a colonial house in the heart of Coyoacán. Alexandra paid and got out, remembering the many family gatherings they had had there in happier times. Raul, unlike Edward, had always been kind to her, although he had never openly defended her against Mercedes. Before she could ring the doorbell, the door opened. It was Edward with wet hair and a casual t-shirt. Thanks for coming, he said. The kids are in the pool with their cousins. Raoul and Lucy went out shopping. Alexandra entered without answering, following the sound of children's laughter to the backyard. There, Matteo and Sofia were playing in the water with their cousins, Gel and Daniela, throwing an inflatable ball to each other. "Mommy!" Sofia shouted when she saw her coming out of the pool and running toward her, leaving a trail of water in her wake. "I missed you so much." Alexandra hugged her, not caring that her clothes were getting wet. "I missed you too, my love." Matteo approached more cautiously, as if unsure how to react. "Hi, Mom," he finally said, letting her hug him. "How are you, my loves?" Alexandra asked, examining them with a critical eye, looking for any signs of distress or discomfort. "Fine," Sofia replied enthusiastically. "Dad bought us ice cream, and Grandma Lupe told us stories about when you were a little girl, and the teacher said you're a hero." "Take a breath, Sophie," Edward interrupted with a smile. "Mom's not going anywhere." Alexandra looked at Edward gratefully for his reassuring comment to Sofia, but she was still cautious. They needed to talk, but not in front of the children. "Why don't you go back to playing for a while?" she suggested. "Dad and I are going to talk in the living room." The children nodded and returned to the pool under the supervision of their cousin's nanny, a young college student who waved at her from a nearby chair. Edward led Alexandra into the living room, an elegant room with antique furniture and paintings by Mexican artists on the walls. They sat on opposite sofas, like adversaries preparing for a negotiation. She knew nothing about the lawsuit. "Get out," Edward said bluntly. "I swear to you, for the sake of the children." Alexandra studied him, looking for signs of deception. She had known this man for 10 years. She had shared his bed. She had raised children with him. If anyone could detect when he was lying, it was her. "I believe you," she finally said. "But that doesn't change the fact that your mother is trying to destroy me, Edward. Not just me personally, but everything I'm building. And now she's putting you in the middle, forcing you to choose sides." Edward ran his hands through his hair in that familiar gesture of frustration. "I know. It's typical of her. When she feels cornered, she attacks. And she doesn't care who she hurts in the process. Even her own son," Alexandra added. "Even her grandchildren, especially the ones she loves," Edward said bitterly, "because she knows she can manipulate them through that love." "What are you going to do?" Alexandra asked. "If they call you to testify, what are you going to say?" Edward looked her straight in the eye. "I'm going to tell the truth, Aile, that my mother hit you without provocation, that she has been abusive to you for years, that I allowed it out of cowardice, out of a misguided sense of loyalty, and that everything you have said publicly is true." Alexandra felt a lump forming in her throat. "Even if it means breaking with your mother for good. Even if it means breaking with my entire past," Edward replied firmly. "It's time for someone in this family to have the courage to do the right thing. And if I can't be that person, then I don't deserve to call myself a man, or a husband, or a father." Something stirred in Alexandra's heart. Despite all the doubts, despite all the pain, she felt a surge of hope. Maybe, just maybe, Edward was really changing. "It won't be easy," she warned. "Your mother has resources, influence. She's going to fight with everything she has." "I know," Edward replied. "But we also have something powerful, the truth, and we are not alone. There are thousands of people supporting you, Ale. People who have lived through the same thing, who have found their voice through yours." The sound of louder splashing and children's laughter came from the backyard. They both instinctively turned toward the source of the noise, sharing that parental connection that survived despite everything. "What are we going to tell the children?" Alexandra asked. "About the lawsuit, about all this. The truth adapted to their age," Edward replied. "That sometimes adults have disagreements and need help to resolve them. That despite those disagreements, we all love them very much. That this does not change the love we have for them." Alexandra nodded. It was the most sensible thing to do. "There's something else," said Edward, leaning forward. "I've been thinking about the house. I know you've been comfortable in the apartment with your mother and the children, but legally the house belongs to both of us. If you prefer, I can stay at the hotel and you can move there. It's more spacious. The children have their own rooms." "Thank you, but for now I prefer to stay where we are," replied Alexandra. "I don't want any more changes for the children. They're already confused by the situation." "I understand," Edward nodded. I just wanted you to know you have that option. The doorbell rang. Edward got up. It must be Raoul with Lucy. They're back from shopping. He headed for the door while Alexandra remained seated, processing everything they had talked about. The lawsuit. Edward's apparent determination to support her was a lot to take in. She heard voices in the hallway, but it wasn't Raoul's. It was a high-pitched, familiar female voice. Her heart skipped a beat. Mercedes, where is she? The voice demanded. Where is that woman? Alexandra stood up, instinctively preparing for confrontation. The living room door flew open, and there stood Mercedes Olivares de Ramirez, elegantly dressed in a lilac outfit with pearls around her neck, her face contorted with rage. You! She pointed an accusing finger at Alexandra. How dare you come here to my son's house? Edward entered right behind her, visibly upset. Mom, stop it. I told you clearly that you couldn't come, that if you wanted to see the children, it would have to be on my terms. Mercedes ignored him and advanced toward Alexandra. It wasn't enough for you to humiliate me publicly, to destroy my reputation, to make me lose my position at the foundation. Now you want to take my grandchildren, my son, away from me. Alexandra stood her ground, refusing to back down in the face of the verbal onslaught. I haven't taken anything away from Doña Mercedes. Your actions have consequences, and I'm not the one suing you. My lawyers will take care of you, Mercedes snapped. We'll see if you're still so brave when you face a trial, when everyone knows what a manipulative woman you are. Enough, Edward exclaimed, stepping between the two women. Mom, I warned you. I won't allow you to continue treating Alexandra this way. She is my wife, the mother of my children, and she deserves respect. Mercedes looked at him in disbelief. Respect after what she has done to me? Edward, open your eyes. This woman is manipulating you. She is driving you away from your family. No, Mom, Edward replied firmly. You are the one who has always tried to control my life. You're the one who never accepted Alexandra, because she came from Coatzacoalcos, because she didn't belong to our circle. You're the one who has insinuated for years that Sophia is not my daughter, who has humiliated Alexandra at every opportunity. And the worst thing is that I allowed it because I didn't confront you, because of that misguided loyalty you instilled in me. Mercedes recoiled as if she had been slapped. After everything I've done for you, she muttered. This is how you repay me. It's not about repaying anything, Mom, Edward replied in a softer voice. It's about doing the right thing, being the man my children deserve, defending my family. Your family. Mercedes let out a bitter laugh. And what am I? I'm your mother. I gave you life, and I'm grateful for that, Edward replied. But giving me life doesn't give you the right to control it. I'm a grown man with my own family, and if you want to continue to be a part of it, you have to respect Alexandra. Respect the woman who has publicly humiliated me. Mercedes shook her head. Impossible. Then you've chosen your path, Edward said sadly. And I've chosen mine. A heavy silence fell over the room. Mercedes looked at her son as if seeing him for the first time. Drop the lawsuit, Mom, Edward said softly. It's not too late to fix things. We can seek family therapy. We can work on a reconciliation, but with mutual respect. Mercedes looked at Alexandra, then at Edward. Her face went from anger to a calculating expression. What if I don't? She asked. If I go ahead with the lawsuit, then I'll have to testify against you, Edward replied, regretfully. I'll have to say under oath that you slapped Alexandra without provocation, that you've mistreated her for years, that you've been abusive to her and to me, and I'll have to cut off all ties with you for the sake of my children and my marriage. Mercedes paled. You wouldn't do that. I will if you force me to, Edward replied. I don't want it to come to that, Mom, but you've left me no choice. At that moment, the door to the patio opened and Mateo and Sophia came in, still wet, looking for towels. Grandma, Sophia exclaimed with innocent joy when she saw Mercedes. Mercedes's face instantly transformed from cold fury to a radiant smile. She bent down to welcome her granddaughter with open arms. My beautiful princess hugged her, not caring that the girl was soaking wet. How is my favorite granddaughter? Fine, Sophia replied. We were swimming with our cousins. Do you want to see how I can jump into the water? Of course, my dear, Mercedes replied sweetly. But let me say hello to your brother, too. Mateo had stayed behind, watching the scene cautiously. At 7 years old, he was more perceptive than his sister and clearly remembered the Mother's Day incident. "Hello, Grandma," he finally said, accepting the hug Mercedes offered him, but without returning it enthusiastically. Alexandra and Edward exchanged glances. Mercedes's duality was disconcerting, capable of shifting from fury to tenderness in seconds when it came to her grandchildren. "Children, why don't you go get changed?" Alexandra suggested gently. "Then we can go get some ice cream." "Can Grandma come?" Sophia asked innocently. An uncomfortable silence filled the room. Mercedes looked at Alexandra defiantly, as if to say, "See, the children love me. You can't take them away from me." "Not today, sweetheart," Edward replied, saving Alexandra from having to answer. "Grandma has other commitments, but you'll see her soon, I promise." Sophia pouted, but accepted the explanation. Matteo watched the adults thoughtfully before following his sister out of the room. When the children left, the tension returned instantly. "You see how much they love me," said Mercedes. "And you?" She looked at Alexandra. "Do you want to take that away from me?" "I've never wanted to take the children away from you," Alexandra replied calmly. "All I've asked for is respect." "Respect?" Mercedes repeated with disdain. "What do you know about respect? You come from a small town, you married my son for his money, for his position, and now you're using this story to make yourself famous." Edward stepped forward. "Enough, Mom. I won't allow you to continue insulting Alexandra in my presence." "Insulting? I'm just telling the truth. This woman saw her opportunity and took advantage of it." "Do you really believe that?" Edward asked incredulously. "After 10 years, after seeing how Alexandra has rejected money, status, and privileges to maintain her independence, after seeing how she has been a devoted mother to my children, a loyal wife, despite my cowardice." Mercedes did not respond. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "You have to decide, Mom," Edward continued. "Either you withdraw the lawsuit, and we start working on a relationship based on mutual respect, or you proceed with it and force me to testify against you. And if you choose the latter, our relationship will never be the same again." Mercedes's face contorted in a mixture of pain and rage. "You're betraying me," she whispered. "Not because of her, Mom," Edward replied sadly. "I'm choosing myself for the first time in my life." Mercedes looked around as if seeking support from the walls. Finally, she stood up straight with dignity. "Very well," she said in a controlled voice. "You've made your decision. We'll see if you don't regret it when this is all over." She headed for the door, stopping in front of Alexandra. "Enjoy your moment of glory," she said quietly. "It won't last forever." And with that, she left the room, leaving behind a silence heavy with emotion. Edward collapsed onto the sofa, running his hands over his face. "I'm so sorry, Ale," he murmured. "I didn't know she was coming. I specifically told her she wasn't welcome." Alexandra sat down next to him, not too close, but close enough to show her support. "It's not your fault. Your mother has always done what she wanted, but this time it won't work," Edward said with renewed determination. "This time she has to face the consequences of her actions, and I have to be on your side, for the children, for you, for myself." Alexandra looked at him and saw a different Edward from the complacent, weak man who had allowed the abuse for years. She saw a man taking a stand, finding his voice, his strength. "Thank you," she said simply. Edward tentatively reached out and took her hand. "We're going to get through this, Ale, together. And then, if you still want me in your life, we can rebuild our marriage on new terms, with new boundaries, as equals." Alexandra squeezed his hand lightly. "Step by step," she replied, "one battle at a time." And as they listened to their children returning down the hall, dressed and ready for the promised ice cream, Alexandra felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Not a naive hope based on fantasies, but a realistic hope grounded in concrete actions, in real changes. Mercedes's lawsuit could be a formidable obstacle. The road to reconciliation, if it was possible, would be long and complex, but for the first time, she felt that she was not fighting alone. And that feeling, More than any media or professional victory was the real triumph. A slap on Mother's Day had changed everything. It had awakened Alexandra, who had been asleep for years under layers of complacency and fear. It had forced Edward to face his own demons, to choose between the past and the future. And although the final outcome was still uncertain, one thing was clear: neither of them would ever be the same person they were before that fateful day. The National Auditorium glowed under the spotlight. A year had passed since that slap on Mother's Day that changed Alexandra's life forever. 365 days of transformations, legal battles over separations and reunions. From the stage, Alexandra looked out at the packed auditorium. Thousands of faces looked at her expectantly, mostly women, but also men who had come to listen, to learn, to support. A huge banner hung at the back: First National Congress Against Domestic Violence for a New York Without Silence. Alexandra adjusted the microphone and took a deep breath. Exactly 1 year ago, my life changed forever, she began. What started as a desperate Facebook post after a slap has grown into a national movement that has helped thousands of women break the silence on violence in the family. The audience listened in respectful silence. During this year, our foundation has established 32 support centers across the country, answered more than 20,000 calls to our helpline, and contributed to the enactment of the Sophia Law, which officially recognizes violence perpetrated by mothers and fathers-in-law as a specific form of domestic violence that requires special care protocols. Spontaneous applause interrupted her speech. Alexandra smiled as she recalled the legislative battle to get the law named after her daughter passed. It had taken months of lobbying, testimony before legislators, and marches in which thousands of women took to the streets with banners demanding no more abusive mothers-in-law. But the road has not been easy, she continued when the applause subsided. Many of you know that I faced a defamation lawsuit, that my family was put in the eye of the storm, that there were moments when I thought the price to pay was too high. She paused, looking for a specific person in the audience. She found him in the third row, smiling proudly at her: Edward. However, I have also witnessed transformations that I thought were impossible. I have seen how men can evolve, break toxic patterns, and set healthy boundaries with their own families for the sake of their partners and children. Edward nodded slightly, acknowledging the implicit message. Next to him were Matteo and Sophia, now 8 and 6 years old respectively, dressed in their best clothes for the occasion. Guadalupe, Alexandra's mother, flanked them, watching them fondly. The case of my mother-in-law, Mercedes Olivares, has been emblematic, Alexandra continued. Many of you followed in the media as her lawsuit became a turning point in the public discussion about this type of violence. Mercedes's face appeared on the huge screen behind Alexandra, a photograph of her entering the courthouse, elegantly dressed, escorted by her lawyer, Claudia Montero. The image had appeared in all the national newspapers. What few people know is that 3 months after filing the lawsuit, Mercedes withdrew it, Alexandra revealed, causing surprised murmurs among those who were unaware of this turn of events. Not because she was afraid of losing, not because of public pressure, but because she finally had the courage to look at herself and recognize that she needed help. The image on the screen changed. Now it showed Mercedes in a park, sitting on a bench, visibly thinner, with a serene expression. My mother-in-law is currently in therapy, working on her own traumas and her need for control, Alexandra explained. The road to reconciliation is long and complex, but she has taken the first steps by acknowledging her toxic behavior and sincerely apologizing, not only to me, but also to her son, for years of emotional manipulation. This was the first time Alexandra had spoken publicly about Mercedes' transformation. She had remained silent for the past 6 months, respecting her mother-in-law's private process, despite the media's insistence on knowing all the details. And that is the part of the message I want to emphasize today. Family violence is not a dead end. Toxic patterns can be broken. People can change if they have the will and the right support. The image changed again. Now it showed Alexandra and Edward at the door of their home in the Park Slope neighborhood, with the children between them. all smiling. "My husband and I separated for 6 months," Alexandra continued in a softer voice. "It was time for him to work on his own patterns, for me to heal my wounds, for both of us to decide if we wanted to rebuild our marriage on a more solid foundation. 2 months ago, we decided to try again with clear rules, healthy boundaries, and a mutual respect that we may never have truly had before." She saw Edward discreetly wipe away a tear and felt her own heart race. It hadn't been easy. Couples therapy, painful conversations, fears, doubts, but every step had been worth it. This is the story I wanted to share with you today on the anniversary of that Mother's Day that changed my life. A story that does not end with a definitive victory or defeat, but with a continuous process of growth, learning, and transformation. Alexandra paused, her gaze sweeping across the packed auditorium. Each of the women here today has her own story of struggle, of survival, perhaps of reconciliation. Those stories deserve to be heard, respected, validated, and that is precisely what we will do during these 3 days of the conference. Listen to each other, learn from each other, build together a future where no woman has to suffer in silence. The ovation was deafening. Women and men alike stood up applauding, some with tears in their eyes. Alexandra saw Edward lift Sophia up in his arms so she could see better, while Matteo applauded enthusiastically. When the applause finally died down, Alexandra added with a smile, "And now it is my honor to introduce our first guest speaker, a woman who has dedicated 30 years of her life to studying the dynamics of power in Mexican families. Dr. Carmen Sanchez from the National Autonomous University of New York." Alexandra made way for a distinguished-looking older woman to take center stage as she sat down in one of the chairs set up for the panelists. As Dr. Sanchez began her presentation, Alexandra exchanged a meaningful glance with Edward in the audience. He blew her a silent kiss, and she felt a wave of gratitude for everything they had been through together. The next 4 hours flew by in a whirlwind of presentations, panels, and questions from the audience. When the first day of the conference finally ended, Alexandra was exhausted but elated. She stepped off the stage to meet her family. Sophia ran toward her, hugging her tightly. "You were amazing, Mom." "Thank you, my love," Alexandra replied, kissing her forehead. Matteo approached more slowly with his characteristic thoughtful seriousness. "Everyone wants to talk to you," he observed. "You're like a celebrity." Alexandra laughed. "It's not about me, Matteo. It's about what we represent. Our family's story is the story of many families in New York." Edward approached and kissed her gently. "I'm so proud of you," he murmured. "Of us." Guadalupe watched them with obvious approval. "Mom, if you could see yourself a year ago and see yourself now, you're a completely different woman." "I'm the same Mom," Alexandra corrected. "Only now I'm not afraid to show who I really am." A group of conference attendees approached, clearly eager to talk to Alexandra. Edward took charge of the situation. "Kids, Grandma Lupe, how about we go get some ice cream while Mom takes care of her admirers? We'll meet up later at the restaurant." "Are you sure?" Alexandra asked. "Can I tell them we'll talk tomorrow?" "What do you mean, sure?" Edward replied with a serene smile. "This is your moment. You've earned it." Alexandra looked at him gratefully. This was the most significant change in Edward. His willingness to support her in her career, to take care of the children when she had commitments, to see her shine without feeling threatened. As her family walked away, Alexandra greeted the people who approached her, young women, some with tears in their eyes, who wanted to briefly tell her their own stories, men who had come to better understand how to support their partners, journalists seeking an exclusive statement. She devoted time to each one, listening attentively, responding honestly. She had learned that her personal story had power not because it was exceptional, but because it was common, because it reflected a reality that millions of women lived in silence. When she finally managed to say goodbye to the last group, she headed for the auditorium exit. As she walked down the aisle, she noticed a familiar figure waiting near the door. Her heart skipped a beat. Mercedes. Her mother-in-law was standing alone, dressed simply in black pants and a white blouse, without the ostentatious jewelry she usually wore. She looked nervous, out of place, very different from the dominant matriarch Alexandra had known for years. "Alexandra," Mercedes greeted her as she approached. "Your speech was very powerful." "Thank you," Alexandra replied, not knowing what else to say. Despite the progress made in recent months, the relationship between the two remained fragile, carefully negotiated. "I didn't expect you to talk about me that way," Mercedes continued, with passion. "It's the truth," Alexandra replied simply. "You're doing a difficult job, facing your own demons. That deserves recognition." Mercedes nodded, visibly moved. "My therapist says that part of my process is learning to express genuine gratitude," she said, as if rehearsing a speech. "So I want to thank you, Alexandra, not only for speaking respectfully about me today, but for," her voice broke slightly, "for not taking my grandchildren away from me when you had every right to do so." Alexandra felt a lump in her throat. She hadn't expected this vulnerability from Mercedes. "The children love you," she replied. "And you love them. I never wanted to break that bond, just set healthy boundaries." Mercedes nodded. "My generation didn't understand healthy boundaries," she reflected. "Love meant possession, control, especially a mother's love for her children." She paused. "I'm learning that there's another way to love, one that doesn't destroy, that doesn't suffocate." Alexandra didn't know how to respond. She never would have imagined hearing these words from Mercedes Olivares. "Will you join us for dinner?" she finally asked. "Edward has made a reservation at the hotel restaurant. Will your sister Laura be there? She's also coming from Monterey for the conference." Mercedes seemed surprised by the invitation. "Are you sure? I don't want to make you uncomfortable." "I'm sure," Alexandra replied. "It's part of the process, isn't it? Building a new relationship step by step." Mercedes smiled slightly, a genuine smile that Alexandra could hardly remember seeing before. "Thank you," she said simply. They walked together toward the auditorium exit, keeping a respectful distance, but moving in the same direction. The symbolism did not go unnoticed by Alexandra. Outside, the sunset bathed New York City in golden tones. Life bustled in the streets, oblivious to the small miracle taking place between these two women, who had gone from being bitter enemies to cautious allies in a difficult process of reconciliation. The restaurant was not far away. As they walked, Alexandra thought about everything that had happened in a year. The slap that triggered her awakening, the Facebook post that went viral, the interviews, the event at the National Auditorium, the lawsuit, the separation from Edward, the moments of doubt and despair, and now this, walking alongside Mercedes, not as victim and perpetrator, but as two women working to heal deep wounds and build a new way of relating to each other. When they arrived at the restaurant, they saw Edward standing at the entrance, with Matteo and Sophia on either side, waiting for them. His expression when he saw them together was first one of astonishment, then of cautious joy. "I invited your mother to have dinner with us," Alexandra explained when she reached his side. "I hope she's okay." "Of course she's fine," Edward replied, leaning down to kiss his mother on the cheek. "It's a wonderful surprise." Sophia, without the emotional complications of adults, simply ran to hug her grandmother. "Grandma, did you see Mom on stage? She was amazing." Mercedes bent down to hug her granddaughter with tears in her eyes. "Yes, my dear. Your mom was incredible. She's a very brave woman." Matteo watched the scene cautiously, still wary. The memory of the slap, of the arguments, was still fresh in his child's mind. Mercedes held out her hand without forcing a hug he wasn't ready to give. "Hi, Matteo. You've grown so much since the last time." The boy nodded, accepting her hand briefly. "Hello, Grandma." It was a small step, but a step nonetheless. Alexandra exchanged a glance with Edward, both recognizing the significance of the moment. They entered the restaurant where Guadalupe and Laura, Edward's sister, were already waiting for them. There was a moment of tension when Guadalupe saw Mercedes, but Alexandra's mother had been informed of the reconciliation process and limited herself to a polite greeting. Dinner passed with less awkwardness than Alexandra had feared. The conversation flowed mainly around the conference, the children, and neutral topics. Mercedes remained relatively quiet, observing the family dynamics with new eyes. At one point, while the children were distracted with dessert, Mercedes leaned toward Alexandra. "I want you to know that I'm proud of you." she said quietly, "of what you've built, of how you've helped so many women, including me, even though it wasn't how either of us would have expected." Alexandra looked at her in surprise. "Thank you, Mercedes," she replied, using her first name for the first time, without the formal Doña that had always put distance between them. "It means a lot coming from you." A toast proposed by Edward closed the evening. Raising his glass, he looked around the table. "To family," he said simply. "Not the one imposed on us by traditions or expectations, but the one we build with love, respect, and honesty." Everyone drank to that sentiment, even Matteo and Sofia with their glasses of juice. Alexandra looked at the faces around the table. Her mother, a symbol of strength and resilience. Her children, the hope of a new generation that would grow up with different values. Her sister-in-law Laura, who had found her own voice inspired by the Mercedes movement in a difficult but courageous process of transformation. And Edward, the man who had had the courage to break toxic patterns to build something better. And herself, the woman who had been awakened from years of silence and submission by a slap on Mother's Day. The woman who had found her voice, and in doing so had helped thousands find theirs. As they returned to the hotel where they would be staying during the conference, Edward intertwined his fingers with hers. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, noticing her pensive expression. "How far we've come," Alexandra replied, "and how much still remains to be done." Edward nodded. "Step by step," he said, repeating the phrase that had become the mantra of their reconciliation. "Slowly but surely," Alexandra confirmed, squeezing his hand. That night, while the children slept in the next room, Alexandra looked out the hotel window. New York City stretched out before her, a sea of lights in the darkness. Somewhere in that vastness, thousands of women were living situations similar to the one she had faced, some still in silence, others finding the courage to speak up, to set boundaries, to demand respect. She felt Edward's arms wrap around her from behind, his chin resting gently on her shoulder. "You're changing the world, Al," he whispered in her ear. Alexandra smiled, leaning back against him. "We're changing it," she corrected. "All of us. Even your mother in her own way." Edward kissed her on the cheek. Who would have thought on that Mother's Day that it would all end like this? "It's not over," Alexandra replied, turning to look him in the eyes. "It's just beginning." And as they melted into an embrace, Alexandra knew it was true. Her story was not over. Neither was Edward's, nor Mercedes, nor the children's. They would continue to write it day by day, word by word, building a new chapter together where love did not mean their mission, where respect was not optional, where family was a refuge and not a battlefield. A story that had begun with a slap, but would continue with thousands of hugs, with clear boundaries and open hearts, with truth as its foundation and mutual respect as its horizon. A story like that of so many women in New York and around the world. Women who, like Alexandra, would one day find the courage to say, "Enough, I deserve more and I'm going to fight for it." The next day, when Alexandra returned to the stage of the National Auditorium to continue the Congress, she would carry with her not only her own story, but that of all those women, and her voice, amplified by microphones, cameras, and social media, would continue to resonate in homes where silence had been the only response for too long, because a single voice that dares to break the silence can unleash a chorus, and that chorus, growing day by day, has the power to transform not only individual lives, but an entire culture. All because of a slap on Mother's Day. All because of a woman who decided that enough was enough. All because of a no that became the most powerful yes. Yes to dignity. Yes to respect. Yes to a life free of violence. Thank you very much for joining us in this moving story. I would love to know where you are watching us from. Write your city or country in the comments. Your presence in our community is very valuable. I invite you to watch our next video. See you in the next story.